Holmes Unhinged. The Wraith of Westminster. The familiar scent of tobacco smoke and old books hung in the air at 221B Baker Street. It was a typical evening in London, with the steady patter of rain against the windows and the dim, flickering glow of gaslights casting long shadows across the cluttered room. Sherlock Holmes sat hunched over his cluttered work table, a series of vials filled with strange concoctions in various stages of transformation scattered about him. His fingers moved with the precision of a master, his eyes flicking from one chemical reaction to the next, absorbed in his latest experiment. Beside him, the ever-reliable doctor. John Watson sat in an armchair, his brow furrowed as he perused the day's newspaper. The headlines of the moment carried whispers of tragedy, a string of deaths among the aristocracy that had shaken London's elite. Over the past month, several prominent figures had met untimely deaths, their bodies discovered within the privacy of their own homes. While the details varied, one striking similarity stood out. Each victim had been found with a peculiar symbol carved into their flesh. The symbol was cryptic, enigmatic, and baffling, an intricate design that seemed to transcend mere mortal understanding. The media, in its characteristic haste, had seized upon the notion of an occult influence, with stories of a secret society of dark and mysterious origin reappearing. The public, eager for answers, whispered of curses and unseen forces at play. Yet Sherlock Holmes was unfazed. With his typical disdain for superstition, he dismissed these theories as mere fodder for the gullible and the weak-minded. "Superstition, Watson," he muttered to his companion without glancing up. "A false comfort for those unable to see the truth. There is always a rational explanation beneath the surface, however unfathomable it may seem." Watson, ever the skeptic himself, nodded absently, his attention still fixed on the paper. He had heard Holmes's thoughts on the matter before, yet the tragic deaths had left him with an uneasy feeling he couldn't quite shake. But the mystery seemed beneath them, until of course the game took a turn. A sudden, sharp knock at the door broke the rhythm of the evening. Holmes didn't stir, his mind firmly absorbed in his work, but Watson stood up to answer it, his hand instinctively reaching for the handle. A uniformed police officer stood in the hallway, holding an envelope. "Mr. Holmes?" the officer inquired. "I was instructed to deliver this." The officer handed Watson the letter and quickly departed, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Watson turned the envelope over, inspecting it for any distinguishing marks. It was plain, with no return address, and as he carefully tore it open, he found a single sheet of paper inside. At first, Watson thought it was just another request for Holmes' expertise, but his eyes widened when he saw the symbol, perfectly etched in ink, a stark and unmistakable match to the one that had appeared on the bodies of the victims. He stared at the paper for a moment before handing it over to Holmes. Holmes glanced at the symbol without a word. A brief smirk crossed his face, but his lips remained tightly pressed as he studied it with newfound interest. "Quite curious," Holmes remarked, still not fully invested in the mystery. "I must admit, the resemblance is striking." "But you dismiss it as superstition?" Watson asked, eyeing his friend carefully. "Indeed," Holmes said dismissively, returning his focus to his experiments. "Superstitions are the playthings of the desperate. This is no more than an unfortunate coincidence." Just as Holmes seemed ready to let the matter go, there came another knock at the door. Watson opened it again, this time revealing a second officer, holding another letter. The officer, looking puzzled, handed over the envelope, which was once again without signature or return address. A growing sense of unease crept into Watson's chest as he examined the new letter. It was identical to the first, bearing the same symbol, again carved meticulously across the page. Holmes's smirk faded as he took the second letter from Watson. This time, his fingers lingered over the edges of the paper. He stood up, his eyes narrowing, the familiar spark of curiosity now unmistakable in his gaze. "This changes things," Holmes murmured, his voice low and contemplative. "Two letters bearing the same symbol, delivered to my door. The coincidence is too much to ignore." Watson watched his friend carefully, noting the subtle shift in Holmes's demeanor. The famed detective who had so easily dismissed the media's theories was now intrigued, and that in itself was a rare thing. The game, it seemed, had only just begun. The carriage rattled through the rain-slicked streets, its wheels cutting through the endless fog. Lord Finsbury's estate loomed ahead, its Gothic spires shrouded in mist, its gaslit windows glowing like the eyes of a sleepless spectre. Watson pulled his coat tighter as they stepped out. "Another dead aristocrat. What do you expect to find here, Holmes?" Holmes barely acknowledged him, already ascending the stone steps with long, eager strides. The door was opened by a pale, shaken butler, who led them through cavernous hallways until they reached the study where Finsbury had been found. The scent of old paper, mahogany, and something coppery filled the air. The fire had burned down to embers, casting flickering shadows over the corpse sprawled in a high-backed leather chair. Lord Finsbury's lifeless eyes stared at the ceiling. A fresh wound marred his chest, a symbol carefully etched into his flesh. Holmes crouched beside the body, fingertips hovering over the carved mark without touching it. No hesitation in the cuts. "This was not done post-mortem," he murmured. "Whoever did this, they were precise, practiced." Watson took a step closer, swallowing his discomfort. "You're suggesting a surgeon?" Holmes gave him a sidelong glance. "Or a priest?" Watson exhaled sharply. "It's nonsense. The press is already calling it the work of an occultist. Superstition infects everything these days." Holmes leaned in, eyes narrowing at something beneath Finsbury's fingernails. "Superstition," he said absently, reaching for his magnifying glass, "or calculation." He pulled a small, curled fragment of parchment from beneath the dead man's nails. It was ancient, its ink barely visible under the dim light. Unfurling it carefully, he revealed a faded sigil, the same symbol carved into Finsbury's chest. Watson stiffened. "That's unsettling." Holmes gave a rare smile. "Then we're on the right path." For 3 days, Holmes barely slept. The study at 221B Baker Street became a maze of papers, photographs, and clippings, the air thick with pipe smoke and fevered deductions. He traced the lives of the victims, 3 dead aristocrats, all killed within the last month, all bearing the same cryptic symbol: Lord Finsbury, the Earl of Wexham, Sir Percival Dunn. Different backgrounds, different circles, yet one common thread. "They were all involved in esoteric societies," Watson observed, scanning a stack of correspondence. "Each dabbled in mysticism and secret orders. Perhaps they simply crossed paths with the wrong madman." Holmes exhaled a thin ribbon of smoke. "Or perhaps they summoned him." He tossed a faded newspaper onto the table. The headline, dated some 20 years prior, read, "The Order of the Black Circle. London's occult aristocrats exposed." Watson frowned. "The Order of the Black Circle? Never heard of them." Holmes tapped the page. "Because they were erased. Their names vanished from society. Their gatherings dissolved, their secrets buried, but not forgotten. And now it would seem someone is digging them up." Watson rubbed his chin. "If they disbanded, why resurface now?" Holmes steepled his fingers. "Perhaps someone believes their work was never finished." Watson shifted uncomfortably. "You don't actually think these men were performing rituals?" Holmes smirked. "You are a man of medicine, Watson. You should know better than anyone. What people believe to be true is often more dangerous than truth itself." A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Hudson entered, looking unsettled. "This just arrived, Mr. Holmes." She handed him a small, unmarked envelope. Holmes opened it carefully, unfolding the paper inside. One single symbol was scrawled in black ink, the very same mark carved into the victim's flesh. No words, no name. Watson inhaled sharply. "Holmes, this was left at our door." For a long moment, Holmes said nothing, then quietly, "Now it is no longer a case." He set the letter down. "It is an invitation." 3. The Society's Shadow. The Rituals of the Order. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson found themselves at the doorstep of Lady Eleanor Blackthorne, a name whispered in hushed tones in the circles of occultists and scholars alike. She was the last known member of the Order of the Shadowed Dawn, a secret society that had once dabbled in the darkest of rituals, seeking knowledge forbidden by man. The widow had retreated into seclusion after the death of her husband, Lord Alexander Blackthorne, a man as infamous for his occult studies as for his tragic demise. The case had become more convoluted than Holmes had initially anticipated. A string of unexplained deaths, linked by a peculiar symbol, had led them down this path, and the connection to the Order was undeniable. Lady Blackthorne had distanced herself from the society years ago, but the rumors about her late husband's final obsession still hung in the air. It was said she was the key to understanding the dark rituals that bound the lives of those now deceased. Upon meeting her in the dimly lit parlor of her estate, Lady Blackthorne's sharp, weary eyes regarded them with suspicion. Her once elegant features had aged under the weight of solitude, but her presence remained imposing. "I'm not sure what you hope to find here," Lady Blackthorne said, her voice cold but tinged with a hint of regret. "I told you, the Order is no more. It perished with my husband." Holmes, however, was undeterred. "I believe, Lady Blackthorne, that the Order has not perished, but rather evolved. We've encountered a symbol, one identical to the mark your husband bore. It's the same symbol found at the scenes of the recent deaths." Lady Blackthorne stiffened. She glanced toward the fireplace, where the shadows of the flickering flames danced across the walls. "I can't tell you everything," she whispered, as if the very air would betray her secrets. "The Order's rituals were dangerous, designed to unlock forbidden knowledge, but—" She trailed off, as though reliving a terrible memory. Holmes leaned forward, his voice steady but pressing. "What happened, Lady Blackthorne? What was the last ceremony your husband and the Order performed?" The widow looked at them both with a tortured expression, as though the memories weighed upon her like chains. Finally she spoke, her words barely audible. It was meant to be the culmination of all their work, the unlocking of the ancient knowledge that could transcend death itself. But something went wrong. Horribly wrong. It was a curse, a dark force, far more than superstition, that was unleashed during that final ritual. Holmes's eyes sharpened with focus. "And this curse, could it be tied to the recent deaths we've investigated?" Lady Blackthorne closed her eyes for a long moment before answering. "The curse bound us all. Anyone who meddled with the rituals, who disturbed the peace of the Order, would suffer. It wasn't just a matter of life and death, it was far darker than that." Watson, sensing the weight of the conversation, looked uneasily at Holmes. "But a curse, Holmes? Are we to believe such nonsense?" Holmes remained silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on Lady Blackthorne, whose features had softened with sorrow. "I do not dismiss what you say lightly, Lady Blackthorne. We must understand the nature of this curse. Tell me, what did the final ritual entail? Was there a particular event that marked its beginning?" The widow hesitated. "The ritual, it was meant to open a doorway to a realm that was beyond human understanding. There were incantations, strange foreign words, that would unlock the knowledge that had been hidden for centuries. But something came through. I do not know what, but it was not of this world." Holmes's mind raced, drawing connections to the strange symbol and the wraith-like figures that had appeared in old legends. "A doorway," he muttered to himself, "a threshold between worlds." A haunting realization. Holmes stepped back, his mind whirling with new information. The pieces began to fall into place, one after the other. He had suspected from the start that the deaths were not random, but now he was certain that they were tied to something far older, something that had endured through the ages. The symbol, so simple, yet so chilling in its repetition, was not merely the mark of the Order of the Shadowed Dawn. It was something more, a marker, perhaps, of the curse Lady Blackthorne spoke of. A curse tied to the Society's final forbidden ceremony. Holmes recalled the tales, the old superstitions that lingered in the back of his mind. Wraiths, shadowy figures that would return from the grave to claim those who had disturbed the secrets of the dead. These were no mere figments of folklore. They were rooted in a truth Holmes could not ignore. The final ritual had summoned something beyond the reach of human understanding, something that was now slowly claiming the lives of those connected to the Order. His thoughts turned to the victims. Each one had a connection to the Order, each one marked by that symbol. Holmes' brow furrowed in concentration as the pieces snapped together. The wraiths, if they existed, were not merely vengeful spirits. They were agents of the curse, entities that could not be escaped. Watson's voice broke through his reverie. "Holmes, you can't seriously believe in this curse, can you? It's not possible. You've always said that logic and reason will explain every mystery." Holmes's gaze shifted to his companion, and for the first time, Watson saw a flicker of doubt in the detective's eyes. "I've always believed that reason could unravel any enigma, Watson. But this is unlike any case we've faced before. I suspect the curse is not merely a superstition, but a force far darker than we can comprehend." Holmes's words lingered in the air, as if the very weight of them threatened to pull them into the abyss. Was the curse real, or was Holmes, the great detective, losing himself in the very web of his own unraveling mind? The answer lay beyond the veil of this world, in a place where reason dared not tread. The fog rolled thick over London that evening, casting a chilling blanket over the streets. Sherlock Holmes sat in his study, lost in his thoughts, as the clock on the mantelpiece ticked slowly toward midnight. The investigation had taken a darker turn, and the mysterious wraith that had once seemed a mere superstition was now creeping into the heart of Holmes's own world. A knock at the door interrupted his musings. Holmes rose from his chair and opened the door to find nothing but the dim glow of the street lamps outside. His eyes narrowed, scanning the mist-covered surroundings. At first, he thought it was simply a trick of the light, but then he noticed something on the door frame, a strange symbol, freshly carved into the wood. The symbol was unmistakable, the same as the one found at each of the death scenes, the mark of the Order of the Shadowed Dawn, now eerily etched into Holmes's own doorstep. The figure who had left it was nowhere to be seen. Holmes stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the situation settling over him. This was no longer a matter of mere investigation. The wraith, whatever it was, had come for him. His keen mind, always certain of its ability to explain the most bizarre occurrences, now faltered. Was this a message, a warning, or something far more sinister? He stepped back inside, locking the door behind him and staring at the symbol. It was a direct threat, one that could not be ignored. His arrogance, once so steadfast, had been replaced by caution. The rational explanations that had once seemed so certain now wavered. Could the curse truly be real? Or was he being manipulated in some elaborate hoax, designed to make him question his own intellect? Holmes did not speak a word to Watson when he arrived later that evening, his mind racing with unsettling thoughts. He did not know whom to trust anymore, least of all himself. As the days passed, strange occurrences became increasingly frequent. At first, they were subtle, faint whispers in the night that seemed to come from no discernible source. Holmes would pause mid-thought, his sharp ears catching the faintest sound, but upon investigation, nothing was amiss. Then there were the footsteps, unseen yet unmistakable, as if someone or something was walking just behind them in the foggy streets. It was a feeling Holmes had not experienced in years. He was the one who pursued, who solved, but now it seemed as though the hunter had become the hunted. Watson, too, had begun to notice the strange atmosphere surrounding them. One evening they walked through a quiet alley, the mist curling around their ankles, when Watson stopped dead in his tracks. "Holmes," he said in a low voice, "do you see that?" Holmes followed his gaze. There at the end of the alley, a shadowy figure stood, motionless, its form indistinct against the darkened backdrop of the alley. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, disappearing into the fog before Watson could react. Holmes's jaw tightened. This was no ordinary human stalker. There was something unnatural about the presence they were sensing, something that made even the most steadfast of men question their grip on reality. The events had become too frequent to be ignored, and Holmes could no longer dismiss them as mere coincidence. The wraith, the very essence of the curse Lady Blackthorne had warned him about, was drawing closer. Holmes's mind raced as he pieced together the strange occurrences. "It is not a haunting, Watson," he said, his voice tinged with the seriousness he had not displayed in days. "These aren't mere apparitions. They are the result of something far darker, tied to the curse of the Order of the Black Circle." Watson frowned. "But what does it all mean, Holmes? The wraiths, the deaths, the symbol? Why now?" Holmes paused, his piercing gaze focused on the fire, crackling in the hearth. "The deaths are not just murders, Watson," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "They are sacrifices, ritualistic offerings to appease the ancient powers that were awakened during the final ceremony of the Order. The victims are not random. They are chosen, marked by that very symbol." Watson's eyes widened. "You think these deaths are part of some ancient ritual? That the wraiths, these shadows, are not merely vengeance, but part of the Order's design?" Holmes nodded. "Exactly, the wraiths are the agents of the curse. The ritual was never meant to end, Watson. It is a cycle, a series of offerings that must continue to satisfy the powers summoned during the final ceremony. The wraiths are the vessels of that curse, sent to claim those who are marked by the Order's symbol." Watson shook his head. "But that symbol, it's everywhere. If it's true, then this curse has a much larger reach than we first believed." "Yes," Holmes replied, "and that is why we must act quickly. The wraith is growing bolder, its influence is spreading, and as we have seen, even those closest to me are now in danger." The aristocracy, once dismissive of the strange deaths and rumors surrounding the Order, now found themselves caught in the grip of fear. Panic spread through London's upper circles like wildfire. Business ceased, social events were cancelled, and many withdrew from public life entirely. The elite were no longer concerned with the occult for entertainment. They feared for their own lives. Holmes and Watson could feel the tension building with each passing day. More symbols appeared, on door frames, on walls, even carved into the stone of buildings. Each one a marker, each one a harbinger of death. The wraiths were drawing closer, and Holmes could no longer rely solely on logic to protect them. They were up against something beyond human comprehension. Holmes's usual calm demeanor began to crack, a subtle sign of the strain he was under. He had always prided himself on his intellect, his ability to find the logical explanation for any mystery. But this was different. This was no longer about solving a case. This was about survival. The question that had plagued him for so long, whether the curse was real, had now been answered, and in its wake, a new question arose. Would he too be claimed by the Wraith before he could uncover the truth behind the Order's final disastrous ritual? As the Wraith drew closer and the power of the curse grew stronger, Holmes knew one thing for certain: time was running out. The game was no longer a matter of deduction, but of sheer will to survive. And the Wraith, with its shadowy form and its whispers from the past, was closing in. The symbol had haunted Holmes's thoughts for days, etched into the very fabric of the case like a dark thread. It was not just a mark of the Order. No, it was far more than that. As Holmes pored over the evidence once more, a chilling realization came to him. The symbol represented a binding pact, an agreement forged with something from the other side. The Wraith, he now understood, was not merely a ghost. It was a physical manifestation, an entity called forth by the Order's ancient rituals. This was no mere haunting or superstition. This was a curse, a powerful force that had been summoned into the world, tethered to the mortal realm by the very ceremonies that had begun with the Order of the Black Circle. The Wraith's presence, Holmes now understood, was not random. It was tied to fear, specifically the fear of those who had long been aware of the dark truths behind the Order. The Wraith fed off that fear, growing stronger with every passing moment, its power growing in proportion to the panic of the city's elite. Holmes's mind raced as he pieced together the final fragments of the puzzle. In order to stop the Wraith and sever the curse that held it in this world, he would have to destroy the source, the altar where the final disastrous ritual had been performed. Hidden beneath the city, deep in forgotten catacombs, the altar awaited, and with it, the key to ending the Wraith's reign of terror. Holmes and Watson, now bound together by the pressing urgency of their task, ventured deep beneath Westminster. The passageways were narrow and damp, the air heavy with the scent of decay as they navigated through the forgotten tunnels that stretched beneath the city like veins in the earth. The deeper they descended, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Holmes could feel the Wraith's presence drawing closer, its cold fingers brushing against the edges of his mind. The shadowy figure that had stalked him for so long was now closer than ever, its malevolent force pushing them forward, urging them toward the altar that held the curse's power. The tunnels seemed to grow darker as they progressed, the faint glow of their lanterns casting long, flickering shadows on the stone walls. In every corner, every crevice, Holmes could sense the Wraith, watching, waiting. The air grew heavier with each step, and even Watson, ever the skeptic, could not ignore the weight of dread that pressed upon them. "Holmes," Watson muttered under his breath, his voice strained with unease. "How much further?" "We're close," Holmes replied, his voice tight with a mix of determination and growing tension. "The altar lies just beyond this passage." They pushed on, moving with urgency, knowing that time was running out. The Wraith's power was growing stronger by the minute, feeding off the terror it had instilled in the city's upper class. If they did not reach the altar in time, the Wraith would be unstoppable. At last, they reached the heart of the catacombs. There, in the center of an ancient chamber, stood the altar, a jagged stone structure stained by centuries of darkness. The air was thick with the sense of something ancient, something powerful, but it was not a presence of peace. This was the birthplace of the curse, the source of the Wraith's power. Holmes could feel it, the palpable malevolence of the place. The Wraith was near, its dark essence swirling around the altar, seeking to protect it. And then it appeared. The Wraith was not the shadowy figure Holmes had expected. It was an ancient, twisted entity, its form shifting like smoke, a dark silhouette with hollow eyes that burned with an unnatural flickering light. It spoke in a voice that was a low guttural whisper, as though the words came from beyond the grave. "You have come too late, Holmes," the Wraith hissed, its voice echoing in the chamber. "The pact has been made. The curse cannot be undone." Holmes did not falter. His eyes narrowed as he focused on the Wraith, searching for the key to its destruction. He knew the answer was here, in this very room. The Wraith's power was bound to the altar. If he could sever the connection between the two, he could break the curse. He turned to Watson. "Prepare yourself. We must destroy the altar." With a single forceful motion, Holmes threw a small vial of oil onto the altar. It erupted into flames, the fire licking the stone as it began to consume the altar's surface. The Wraith shrieked, its form writhing in agony as the flames began to spread, but it was not enough. The Wraith's power was still too great, and it surged toward them with frightening speed. Holmes took a deep breath, his mind working faster than ever. He needed something more. A single thought crystallized in his mind. The altar was not just a physical structure. It was a symbol, a conduit for the dark power that had been summoned. The ritual had bound the Wraith to the stone, and now that the altar was aflame, the ritual needed to be broken. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small but powerful artifact. A crystal he had retrieved from Lady Blackthorn's mansion. It was an ancient object, one that had been used in the final ceremony to bind the Wraith. Holmes knew it was the key to severing the link between the altar and the Wraith. With a swift motion, he thrust the crystal into the heart of the flames. As it made contact with the fire, a brilliant light erupted from it, filling the chamber with an intense, searing glow. The Wraith screamed, its form contorting violently as the light pierced its very essence. In an instant, the Wraith dissipated, its power shattered by the destruction of the altar and the crystal's energy. The room fell silent, save for the crackling of the flames as they consumed the remnants of the cursed altar. The Wraith was gone. Its power had been broken, and the curse that had haunted the city for so long was no more. Yet, the toll it had taken on Holmes was evident. As the adrenaline faded, the weight of what he had experienced settled heavily on his shoulders. Watson watched him carefully, his expression one of concern. The case had shaken them both, but it was Holmes who seemed to have been most deeply affected. There was a subtle change in his demeanor, his sharp mind now clouded with doubt. Holmes turned away, his thoughts a whirlwind. What have we truly seen, Watson? Was it the supernatural, or was it simply the product of my mind, strained by exhaustion and the pressure of the case? Watson hesitated before replying. Perhaps it was a bit of both, Holmes. The mind can play tricks when pushed to its limits. Holmes did not answer. His gaze was distant, lost in thought, as if searching for an answer that eluded him. The case was over, but the questions it raised would haunt him for far longer than the Wraith ever could. As they left the catacombs behind, Holmes knew that some mysteries would remain unsolved, no matter how sharp his mind or how deep he delved into the darkness. The supernatural may have been vanquished, but the true nature of the curse, the nature of fear itself, was something that could never be fully understood. The case had ended, the Wraith vanquished, and the curse broken. The city could breathe again, its air no longer thick with fear and paranoia. But as I sit beside Holmes, watching him in the quiet solitude of our Baker Street rooms, I cannot shake the feeling that the true toll of this case has only begun to show itself. Holmes has always been a man of sharp intellect and unwavering certainty, but even he has his limits. The terror we witnessed beneath Westminster, the sinister force that had so nearly overtaken us, has left a mark on him. I have seen him question his own reasoning, doubt his mind in ways that are as unfamiliar as they are unsettling. He, who once prided himself on his unshakable logic, now finds himself haunted by shadows of uncertainty. The symbol, the wraith, the curse, they are gone, or so it seems. But what remains is something far more insidious. The gnawing realization that there are forces at work in the world beyond our comprehension, that there are mysteries that defy explanation, that no amount of intellect or reason can conquer. Holmes has never been one to shy away from the unknown, yet I have noticed a subtle shift in him, a deeper, quieter obsession with the case, with its lingering questions. It is as if he is not ready to let go of the darkness that almost consumed him, as if he feels the need to understand it, to control it, to prove that even the supernatural can be dissected and understood. But in his search for answers, he has started to withdraw further into himself, distancing himself from all but his work. Even I, his closest friend, find it harder to reach him these days. For all of his genius, Holmes is not immune to the toll that uncertainty can take. I can see it in the lines etched deeper into his face, in the way his eyes, usually so sharp and focused, have grown distant. He no longer sleeps as soundly as he once did, and though I have watched him tackle some of the most complex cases of our time, this one has left him rattled in ways I have never seen before. The case may be over, but the questions it raised have unsettled him. He speaks of the supernatural less often now, but I can tell the subject still weighs heavily on his mind. He will not let it rest. Holmes cannot simply leave a puzzle unsolved, and this case, this encounter with forces beyond his grasp, has left a riddle that refuses to be unraveled. Perhaps that is the most dangerous aspect of this entire affair, the uncertainty it has planted in his mind. Holmes has always thrived on certainty, on the satisfaction of finding answers to the most complex of mysteries. But this time, there is no definitive answer. The wraith may be gone, the ritual broken, but there are lingering questions that will never be fully answered. And in the end, it is this very uncertainty that will continue to drive Holmes closer to the edge of his unraveling. As I sit here, watching him pore over his notes once again, I cannot help but wonder how long it will take before this obsession consumes him entirely. Holmes has never been one to shy away from danger, but this is a danger of a different kind. It is a danger of the mind, a quiet unraveling that comes from within. The terror of the unknown, the inability to reconcile logic with the inexplicable, is a burden that may prove too much even for him. And so, as we close the chapter on this dark mystery, I am left with a growing unease. The city is safe for now. But what of Holmes? Will he ever be the same? Will he ever find peace with the questions that remain unanswered? Or will this case, this encounter with the unknown, be the one that finally breaks him? In the end, it is not the wraith nor the curse that haunts me. It is the thought that perhaps Holmes, my friend, my confidant, will never truly escape the shadows that this case has cast upon him. And as the days pass, I fear that the very mind that has solved so many mysteries may one day become its own enigma, lost in the search for answers that can never be found.